Hello from Georgia, and welcome back to my weekly podcast on the history of Georgian art. Today we are going to talk about medieval Georgian iconography. For those who are not familiar with icons, with what icons are, I can tell you only briefly now that icons are painted panel images in churches meant for veneration of the divine. Usually they portray the images of Jesus Christ and the Virgin Mary and the saints. Some icons were used on altar screens, some iconostasis, as it is called. Some icons were put for veneration in front of the altar, and some icons even served as portable altars for travelers, and some icons were used in processions. There was time in Byzantium, however, when icons were considered as something bad. Some people, called iconoclasts, decided that icons were modern or contemporary versions of idols, and they saw it as an idolatry. So they saw them as dangerous and something dangerous for Christian faith. So Byzantine iconoclasm took place in 7th, 9th centuries. And the theology of icons we owe to holy fathers of the church, particularly St. John of Damascus especially. And then the Seventh Ecumenical Council declared that veneration of icons had a great meaning and importance for the church. So veneration of icons came back after 9th century in Byzantium. However, it never took place in Georgia, as we know it. Having said that, I have to tell you that early icons in Georgia are not preserved. The first painted icons we have are dated back to the 9th century, even though the earlier one which we have is dated to the 6th, 7th centuries, and it's called Anchis Khadi. You probably remember I told you when we spoke about repoussé art, about metalwork, I told you that Bekao Bizari made a frame for this icon, which is metalwork, but the icon itself came to Georgia from, well, not to Georgia, it already was was Georgian, but it kind of belongs to a Syrian circle, as they say, and there are some sources which say that it is related to the names of the church fathers, those Syrian fathers who came to Georgia in the 6th century. So this is the earliest one we have, but the earliest painted Georgian icon, which we know for sure that it's painted by a Georgian master, is Tsilgani icon of the Mother of God, which is dated to the 9th century, and I'm sure I'm going to find it in a minute for you. I apologize, my bookmarks keep disappearing for some reason lately. So here, this is the earliest icon, which is called Tsilgani, icon of the Mother of God. As you see, there is something archaic about it. However, the Byzantine influence is very obvious here, but it's also very, very Georgian, very local, let's say. I mean, Byzantine influence, when I'm saying, is that you can see that all the things which are which are like rules or canons accepted in Byzantine iconography, they all are there. But the style is very much very kind of specific, let's say. You can see these lines which are very broad, very quite strong and pronounced, let's say. This is a icon Hodigitria type, where the Mother of God is holding the baby Jesus and pointing to him as a way to salvation. Georgian icons, most of them are preserved in museums now, all Georgian icons, because that's where they are the safest, probably. But some of them are in churches, in Svaneti especially, if you really, really want to see great Georgian iconography, do come to Georgia and go and see them in Svaneti. Now, especially the icons, the Svanetian icons, dated to the 11th, 12th centuries. This is the time when Georgia is flourishing and it reaches the peak. The stronger the country grew in those days, the more sophisticated was becoming its art. Now, Svanetian frescoes, as you probably remember, most of them were made by the artists from royal court. These icons are probably by same masters. As you see, they are no longer as archaic as the Tsilkani icon was. You can see that instead of flat representation, there is some modeling on the faces. Even though shadows are not accepted in iconography, but you can see that this kind of darker parts are giving these shapes more volume. Just like in relief sculpture and in metalwork, the tendency towards voluminous representation is also obvious in painting, in icons. Also, this elegance of forms and these lines are more kind of flowing, more gentle, let's say. They say that they are radiating more spirituality. But, you know, the word spirituality is a bit difficult to explain, to define. What exactly do we mean by that? Well, I would say they radiate more gracefulness, more grace, and they look more peaceful. Not more, I mean, I wouldn't say that Tsilkani icon is not peaceful, it's just a kind of different style. And this style is more sophisticated, let's say. So if you go to Svaneti, please do see this, one of the icons, because the other one is at the museum now, so you can only see one of these in Lagurka church. There is also this icon of 40 martyrs of Sebastia. The story here is that in a Roman province, 40 soldiers were forced by their commander to accept pagan religion and to give up on Christianity. While they refused, they were first they were stoned, but the commander saw that the stones were not hitting them, but it actually went back to him and his face. So he didn't like them like that. And he stripped them naked and put them in a lake, in a freezing water. So they were standing there all night, and there was a warm bath nearby as a temptation, kind of tempting them to go there and get warmed. So one of them, according to this story, decided to give up and accept pagan religion as a result, to go there and have this warm bath, but he died. So it didn't work anyway. And watching this, one Roman soldier himself, who was part of this army who was torturing these people, he himself stripped himself naked and stood here so to refill and become the 40th one. So you can see this Svanetian icon of the 40 martyrs. You can see the compassion and emotion on their faces. If you keep looking very carefully, some of them are hugging each other, trying to empower and strengthen each other. So you're not alone, I'm here. And in the bottom somewhere, you can even see that they are looking after the one who is falling down because he's in a very, very bad shape after this torment and torture. This amazing emotional expressiveness would not be characterized for icons of earlier times. But here, a master is already trying to give these emotions, feelings, which becomes even more obvious in later times. In the 14th century, no, this is also 11th century again. Now I want to show you those two. This crucifixion here, taking down from the cross. These are also quite amazing icons you need to see. And they are, as you see, they are put in frames of repoussé art. And here too, you can see that interest to anatomical details is quite obvious. So it's kind of, I wouldn't say that they are after realistic expression as such, because you know that iconography does not follow the principles of realistic painting. On the contrary, if you have heard about reverse perspective, it's not only just about perspective, which is very important. The thing is that when you look at icons, you do not look from your side to the depths. But the idea, the theological idea, is that God is looking to you, at you, from the icon towards you. So they are called sometimes as windows to heaven. And the perspective does not go in a realistic painting. As you know, the linear perspective means that it is broader on your side and it gets narrower on the other side, which indicates the depth in painting. But here, in icons, it's the other way around. It's broad, it's wide inside of the icon, inside meaning that on the other side, and it gets narrower towards you. And this idea, this theological idea, reverses everything, not just the linear perspective. It reverses the meaning. The idea is not that you are looking at that world, but it's like they are looking at you and you are venerating them. So according to St. John of Damascus, when you venerate the icon, that's the main difference between idolatry and icon veneration. That when you venerate an icon, you do not venerate the matter. You do not worship the wood and paint, color paint itself, but you venerate whoever is depicted there. The veneration goes to the prototype of the image. So that was the kind of golden age, let's say, of Georgian iconography. And in the later period, as we always say, something goes not quite, after 16th century in particular. But unfortunately, I don't have, for some reason, I cannot find any 14th century images. But I can tell you that in the 14th century, in 14th century icons, just like in fresco paintings, the Paleologan influence is very great. The tendency towards presenting volume and three-dimensional impression is even greater. and those kind of whitening bits are showing that it's kind of goes higher up, which, yes, it does have some kind of inclination towards realistic painting, but at the same time it still remains within the frames of canonical iconographical standards and rules and norms. Now, later, after the 16th century, there were influences, Persian influences in Georgian art, and even later, I mean in the 18th century, Russian influences came in. Now, I can show you this. I already showed you the, this is not, anyway, this is the icon of the Savior of Jerusalem here. And you can see some kind of Russian tendency, Russian influence in there. And the thing is that when we speak about Russian influence, very often what we mean in iconography in particular is the westernization, when westernized kind of features infiltrated in iconography and Western elements came in, by which we refer to realistic tendencies towards realistic painting. But I think this is very often exaggerated. Actually, I wrote my PhD thesis on this kind of misconception, let's say, that the West is often blamed for corrupting Orthodox iconography. While I think this is a mere pure exaggeration, I think what happened there, especially in Russian iconography, and then it came through in Georgia too. First of all, it was not anybody Western or Western painters who imposed anything on iconography. It was Russian iconographers, and then Georgians followed them too, who brought in those very unnatural elements to iconography, let's say, unnatural for iconography. And the other thing is that some authors say that it was not exactly Western art as such, but it was particularly, very specifically, Polish Baroque, which was very fashionable in those days, and they decided to adopt many things from there. But even having said that, I think the problem there was that they were adopted in a very bad way, let's say. It's almost like kind of accepting some kitschy standards into iconographic tradition, which didn't go well, obviously, and it ruined everything. Well, I'm not saying this about this particular icon, because it's not, I mean, I'm not accusing it of that. There are other icons which are not here, and I don't have them for a reason, because I don't keep them. But you can see them if you go into some of the churches in Georgia. You can see some very, very strange things. I mean, most of them are not even painted. They are paper prints put up all over the place, and they can really scare you away. But they are not exactly, I mean, icons which you would want to venerate. There are other icons and you don't have to go to them. But having said about this Russian influences, no, this is not, unfortunately, not an icon. Yes, I can show you one. Let's say it's not exactly an icon, it's more of a painting. Can you see here, this lower corner? This is the painting picture depicting that story. If you remember, I told you about when Saint Nino, when they were in the process of building Sveti Troveli, the initial wooden church of Sveti Troveli on top of the grave of the robe of Christ, and they couldn't move one of the pillars, and by the prayers of Saint Nino, this pillar suddenly miraculously by itself stood up and was standing in air, up in air, just by itself. So this is a story which Sabinin, the Russian painter, painted, and you can see it here. So I would not say that this is an icon, it's just a painting of a story. But nevertheless, there were some influences in iconography like this, but they didn't stay. And we owe this to our Catholicos Patriarch, Ilya II, who decided to revive true and authentic Georgian tradition of icon painting. And thanks to him, there is a great revival. However, as I told you about many other fields of art, I do fear that there is still something missing in this modern iconography again. I'll show you some of them, and you tell me, you think about it, if the artistic quality meets those standards set by our ancestors in the past. I'm not criticizing it. I do go to churches and venerate these icons because they are icons. They have all the features which Orthodox icons need to have. I'm only talking about the stylistic side. I'll tell you my own story. In the 1990s, when I joined this revival myself personally, and I really, really wanted to learn icon painting, I went to a studio of one of the icon painters, and she gave me kind of things to do, how to learn. Well, we began from painting ornaments, repainting, copying ornaments, and it was kind of fun in a way. Then we went on to actual icons, and we were copying them using transparent copy papers. And it was a very good thing to do while I was learning. And I really enjoyed it because, I was mastering my lines, I was trying to refine my skills. It was very, very useful. But later, I realized that this is going to happen to me even when I feel like I've mastered it. Because the way the Georgian icon painters, most of them at least, I don't know if all of them do that, the way they do it is to use those patterns and copy the other icons. And then they add colors. Well, for me, it was a bit like, I don't know, those children's pattern coloring books. That's how I felt about it, because I'm a kind of rebellious, creative person and I want to do something on my own. But on the other hand, when I thought about it, well, I'm sure in the past, that's how they did it too, even in Byzantium. Well, not exactly using the transparent papers, of course. They used patterns which had holes, and then they put charcoal on it, and those holes made lines, so they could follow these little dots and make the this process work. But I believe that was the case in the process of learning, but I really, really doubted that great masters, when they already mastered the skills, that they were bound to this kind of practice of copying. So I think what we really, really need to copy is not the lines or colors. Well, colors maybe, yes, because they have some symbolic meaning, but I think it's not the patterns to copy, but I think we really need to copy our ancestors' authenticity and their truthfulness, creative truthfulness, first of all to their own selves and to God. Anyway, speaking of all that, our patriarch himself is an icon painter. So he painted this famous icon, which we call the icon of the Holy Trinity here. But if you remember the Rublev icon, it's not called the Holy Trinity, but it's called the Hospitality of Abraham. So that's the story, the kind of motif of this too. That's a theme. So this is painted by the Catholic Patriarch himself. And it's put in the Cathedral of the Holy Trinity as the main icon to venerate there. Well, not the main icon, but it's kind of dedicated to the church too, to the cathedral. So, even though I do feel some kind of decline in the style on the whole, I mean, I'm not meaning any particular icon, I respect all of them, but I do feel that there is some kind of decline in style. However, while the artistry declined in later periods, these icons remain invaluable witnesses and windows into the Georgian past. They tell stories of faith, artistry, and the nation's evolving identity across the centuries. Just picture a small, intrinsically painted wooden panel, no larger than a book, created in a dimly lit environment of a workshop in the 9th or 10th century Georgia. It begins a journey that will span the centuries. From the workshop, from the artisan's hands, it goes to the church. It watches over people's joys and sorrows. Lots of people owe to it the major miracles of their lives. And then those icons, some of them, end up in museums, and they tell the story of the nation's faith to non-Georgians, to visitors from all over the world. Please do come to Georgia and see these marvelous icons, which are spread all over the country. If you enjoyed my podcast, please subscribe and like our channel. Bye for now. Thank you.